Look at this photograph. A steam locomotive, a machine of iron and fire, carving its way through a world that should not contain it. This is the Congo, 1898. The green heart of a continent, a place of legend, defined by its impenetrability. Yet, here we see evidence of industry. A perfectly laid steel railway stretching for 400 kilometers from the coast, through dense jungle, over 99 ravines, and through blasted mountainsides. The official story is one of colonial ambition, a triumph of will against the odds. We are told this was accomplished in just 8 years, by men with little more than pickaxes, shovels, and dynamite. A story of immense human suffering and endurance. But is that what we are really looking at? We are told to accept this as a monument to progress. But the numbers do not support the narrative. The logistics do not work. The timeline is an impossibility. When you subtract the story, and are left with only the physical evidence, a different conclusion begins to emerge. A more unsettling one. This railway should not exist. Not in this time, not in this place, not with the tools they claim to have used. The official history is a facade, a carefully constructed story to explain away an object that defies its own origin. We will not be looking at the story. We will be looking at the facts. The impossible tonnage of steel. The fuel requirements that are never mentioned. The engineering that stands in stark contradiction to the era. What if this railway was not built, but found? What if the project was not one of creation, but of reclamation? The evidence suggests that the true origin of this impossible railway has been deliberately and completely erased. Before we examine the numbers, we must first look closely at the object itself. The Matadi-Léopoldville Railway. Let us observe it not as a historical artifact, but as a piece of physical evidence. The first anomaly is the quality of the earthworks. The official account describes tens of thousands of laborers, using rudimentary tools, to carve a path through the Crystal Mountains. But the images show something else entirely. We see sheer rock cuttings, walls of stone sliced away with a precision that defies the use of dynamite and hand tools. The surfaces are often remarkably flat, the angles too perfect. With 19th century blasting techniques, one would expect shattered, irregular rock faces. Piles of rubble. Instead, we see cuts that look almost surgical. How is this level of precision achieved? We are shown archival photos of men with pickaxes, posing near the rock walls. But the scale is wrong. The men look insignificant against the sheer size of the excavation. The tool does not match the result. The effect is disconnected from the alleged cause. Then there are the bridges. The railway crosses 99 ravines. Some are small, but many are vast chasms, hundreds of feet deep. Spanning them are steel trestle bridges. These are not simple wooden structures. They are complex engineering works, composed of thousands of prefabricated steel components, riveted together. Consider the logistics of just one of these bridges. Massive steel girders, each weighing several tons, had to be transported from a European foundry, shipped to the port of Matadi, and then carried deep into the jungle. And then what? How were these multi-ton components lifted into place, 100 feet or more in the air, without the use of modern, heavy lift cranes? The official record is silent on this crucial step. It speaks of courage and determination, but not of mechanics. It offers no schematics for the assembly process. We see the finished product, a marvel of engineering, but the construction phase is a void. The visual evidence presents us with a profound contradiction. On one hand, we have images of primitive labor. On the other, we have a finished piece of infrastructure that suggests a much higher level of technology. The two images cannot both be true. The railway itself looks too modern, too clean, too precise for its alleged origin story. The very character of its construction feels out of time. It's as if a 20th century industrial object was dropped into a 19th century landscape. And this visual dissonance is our first clue that the official narrative is not just incomplete. It is fundamentally wrong. Here, the narrative breaks down completely. Let us engage in a simple thought experiment. Let us take the official story at its word and attempt to map out the logistics required. The task is to build a 400-kilometer railway, starting from the coast and moving inland. The first and most critical failure point is tonnage. We must quantify the materials. A standard steel rail of that era weighed approximately 30 kilograms per meter. The line is 400 kilometers, or 400,000 meters long, and requires 2 rails. That is 800,000 meters of rail. The calculation is simple. 800,000 meters multiplied by 30 kilograms is 24,000 metric tons. 24,000 tons of steel rails alone. This is the weight of 4 modern naval destroyers. And this is just the beginning. We must add the railway ties, or sleepers. If made of steel, they could add another 20,000 tons. If made of hardwood, they must be harvested and shaped nearby, requiring another layer of industrial logistics. Then come the fasteners, the fish plates, the spikes, the bolts, thousands of tons more. We are already conservative to estimate 50,000 tons just for the track itself. Now, we add the 99 bridges. The steel required for these structures is immense. Let's be generous and say the total comes to another 20,000 tons. And we cannot forget the locomotives and the rolling stock. Dozens of steam engines, each weighing between 30 and 50 tons. Hundreds of wagons. This adds thousands more tons to our manifest. Conservatively, we are looking at the transport of nearly 100,000 tons of industrial material. And how was it to be moved? The railway did not exist yet. The jungle had no roads. The only power available was human power. The primary method of transport in the region was the porter system. A strong porter could carry a load of perhaps 25 kilograms over difficult terrain. To move 100,000 tons, which is 100 million kilograms, would require 4 million individual porter journeys. 4 million. This assumes each porter carries his load from the coast to its final destination. This is, of course, impossible. The supply line would need to be a relay. But this only complicates the problem. It requires camps, food, water, and security for tens of thousands of porters, stretched out over hundreds of kilometers of hostile jungle. And this only accounts for the railway's components. What about the tools to build it? The explosives for blasting? The food and supplies for the actual construction crews? What about the fuel? This is the question the official histories never address. A steam locomotive, especially one hauling heavy construction materials, consumes enormous quantities of coal and water. To build the last kilometer of track, a supply train must travel 399 kilometers to deliver the materials. It must haul its own coal for the round trip, plus the coal for other machinery. The entire project becomes a logistical death spiral. The further you build, the more fuel you must transport simply to transport the fuel. Where did these mountains of coal come from? They would have to have been shipped from Europe, creating a second, parallel supply chain of impossible tonnage. The official story asks us to believe that this entire, monumental logistical operation was carried out for 8 straight years in one of the world's most difficult environments, with no infrastructure to support it. It is not a story of endurance. It is a fantasy. When the physical and logistical evidence contradicts the official story, we must turn to the records themselves. We must ask what proof is offered. What we find is not a detailed account of an engineering project, but a carefully curated piece of mythology. The primary sources from the period, the reports from the Congo Free State, the memoirs of the engineers, the newspaper articles back in Europe, they all speak in the same voice. They use a language of epic struggle. Words like Herculean, unflinching, monumental are common. They describe the jungle as a green hell and the workers' efforts as superhuman. This is the language of propaganda, not of project management. It is designed to evoke emotion, not to provide information. Where are the logistical manifests? A project of this scale would have generated a mountain of paperwork. Shipping receipts from the steel foundries in Belgium and Britain. Cargo manifests for every ship that arrived in Matadi. Detailed inventories of tools, explosives, and provisions. Daily work logs from the construction supervisors. None of this exists in any coherent, verifiable form. The records that have been made public are high-level summaries. They give general figures for the workforce, often contradictory. They give a final cost for the project. They list the number of bridges built. But they omit the most critical details: how the work was actually done, how the supply chain was maintained, how the impossible was made possible. The narrative a project of brutal, forced labor. Thousands of workers, many brought from other parts of Africa and as far away as China, perished from disease, exhaustion, and cruel treatment. This is presented as the price of construction. But this narrative, while tragic, is also convenient. It serves to explain the inexplicable. When faced with a feat that seems to defy the laws of engineering and logistics, the storytellers insert an unquantifiable variable: extreme human suffering. They suggest that the project was completed not with technology or logistics, but with human lives. This explanation discourages further questioning. To question the feasibility of the project becomes tantamount to dismissing the suffering of those who died. It is an emotional shield against logical scrutiny. We see this pattern repeated. In many colonial projects of the era, a high death toll is used to provide a moral and physical weight to the construction narrative, filling the void where logistical details should be. The official story of the Congo Railway is not a record. It is a template, a story designed to fit a pre-approved conclusion, regardless of the facts. The Matadi-Léopoldville Railway is not an isolated anomaly. It is one data point in a much larger, global pattern that emerged in the latter half of the 19th century. If we widen our lens, we see the same impossible story being told, again and again, in different parts of the world. Consider the railways of the Andes. The Central Railway of Peru, largely constructed in the 1870s. It is one of the highest railways in the world, ascending to over 15,000 feet above sea level. The engineering is breathtaking. It crosses 69 tunnels and 58 bridges, including the terrifying Infiernillo Bridge, wedged between two vertical rock faces. The official story, once again, credits a determined engineer and thousands of laborers with hand tools. But we must ask the same questions. How was tons of steel, heavy drilling equipment, and entire locomotives transported to these extreme altitudes, decades before the existence of heavy-duty trucks or helicopters? How were the bridge components lifted and secured over chasms 1,000 feet deep? The logistical challenges in the Andes are arguably even greater than those in the Congo, yet the narrative is identical. It was done through sheer force of will. Now let us turn to Siberia. The construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway began in 1891, at the same time as the Congo project. Its scale is an order of magnitude larger. Thousands of kilometers of track laid across the world's most unforgiving terrain. Permafrost, mountains, and vast, unpopulated forests. The story is the same. Armies of laborers with primitive tools, conquering nature. But again, the logistics are never fully explained. The amount of earth that had to be moved, the number of bridges built, the sheer quantity of steel required, it all strains credulity. The speed at which sections were completed seems impossible without a level of mechanization that did not officially exist. Look at the Great Alpine Tunnels. The Gotthard Tunnel, completed in 1881, 15 kilometers long, bored through solid granite. The official accounts praise the new technology of pneumatic drills and dynamite. But they downplay the immense, almost magical precision required. Two teams started on opposite sides of a mountain range, and after 10 years of digging, met in the middle with a near-perfect alignment. The surveying and engineering required for such a feat is extraordinary. And once again, the logistics of supplying the machinery, the workers, and removing millions of tons of rock from deep inside a mountain are glossed over. The Congo, the Andes, Siberia, the Alps, all different environments, all different cultures. But the pattern is the same. An impossible piece of infrastructure. An official story that relies on heroic manual labor. A narrative that omits any detailed logistical plan. And a timeline that defies the stated means of construction. Are these all separate, miraculous achievements? Or are they related phenomena, pieces of a single, hidden history, explained away with the same convenient cover story? Let us set aside the epic stories and engage with the cold, hard logic of numbers. Narratives can be manipulated, but arithmetic cannot. We will attempt a very conservative calculation of the work required. The primary task is earth-moving, creating a level bed for 400 kilometers of track through mountainous terrain. Let's ignore the massive ravines and tunnels for a moment and consider only the basic cuttings. Assume, very conservatively, a cutting just 2 meters deep and 4 meters wide on average. This is likely a dramatic underestimate. The calculation, 2 meters times 4 meters is 8 square meters. Multiplied by 400,000 meters in length, this gives us 3.2 million cubic meters of earth and rock to be excavated and moved. 3.2 million cubic meters. How long would this take? The project spanned 8 years, or approximately 2,900 days. This means that every single day, for 8 years, the workforce had to excavate over 1,100 cubic meters of earth and rock. Official records state the workforce peaked at around 30,000 men. However, not all of them were excavators. Many were tasked with laying track, building bridges, cooking, guarding, or transporting supplies. Let's generously assume that 1/3 of the entire workforce, 10,000 men, were dedicated solely to excavation. This means each of those 10,000 men would need to dig, shovel, and transport about 0.11 cubic meters of earth and rock every day. This seems deceptively small, but we are talking about dense, compacted soil and solid rock, using hand tools, in a tropical climate with debilitating diseases. And our initial estimate of a 2 by 4 meter cutting is absurdly small. In the Crystal Mountains, cuttings were dozens of meters deep. The true volume of excavated material was likely 10 or 20 times higher. If we adjust to a more realistic 20 million cubic meters, the daily requirement per worker becomes impossible. It is beyond the limits of human endurance. Now, let's consider the workforce itself. The official narrative admits to thousands of deaths. Let us take a low estimate of 2,000 deaths over the 8-year period. That is a loss of one worker almost every single day. These were skilled and unskilled laborers who had to be replaced. How? A constant stream of new workers had to be recruited, shipped from overseas, transported into the jungle, and trained. This represents another massive, unspoken logistical operation. An operation to move people, not just steel. The numbers for replenishment alone would require a dedicated fleet of ships and an army of recruiters. The official story uses the death toll as a badge of honor, a sign of the project's difficulty. But the logic suggests another possibility. The workforce numbers may have been inflated from the start, to make the impossible productivity seem more plausible. The entire demographic and labor calculation simply does not add up. The project required the output of machines, but the story only provides the input of men. The equation is unbalanced. The numbers tell a clear story, one that has nothing to do with heroism and everything to do with impossibility. We have demonstrated the failure of the official narrative. The visual evidence is anomalous. The logistical requirements are impossible. The numbers do not compute. We are left with an unacceptable contradiction. The railway exists, but it could not have been built as described. So, we must construct an alternative hypothesis. One that is grounded not in fantasy, but in a sober assessment of the evidence. The hypothesis is this: the 19th century Matadi-Léopoldville railway project was not an act of creation from scratch. It was an act of reconstruction, of refurbishment, on a pre-existing infrastructure. Let us consider the implications. The most difficult and logistically impossible part of the project was the earthworks, carving a smooth, graded path through the mountains. What if this path already existed? What if the cuttings were already cut, the tunnels already bored, and the embankments already raised? What if the work of the 19th century crews was not to excavate millions of tons of rock, but to simply clear away centuries of jungle overgrowth, soil, trees, and vines, from a man-made structure that was already there? This single change resolves nearly every logistical paradox. The impossible productivity of the workforce is explained. They were not engaged in heavy earthmoving, but in clearing and cleaning. The need for advanced, non-existent machinery vanishes. The original builders, from a much earlier and unknown period, would have possessed the necessary technology. The timeline of 8 years suddenly becomes plausible. Clearing and re-railing 400 kilometers is a major undertaking, but it is feasible. Building it from the ground up is not. This hypothesis also explains the state of the bridges. The original stone abutments for the 99 ravine crossings may have already been in place. The 19th century engineers would have simply needed to survey them and commission new steel trusses from Europe to fit the existing gaps. This reduces the problem from a monumental construction project in the jungle to a much more manageable assembly and repair job. The narrative of building the railway was a necessary fiction. For the colonial authorities, claiming to have built such a marvel was a powerful symbol of their technological superiority and their right to rule. It was a way of stamping their own history onto a landscape that may have already contained a history far older and more advanced than their own. They found a relic of a lost system, and claimed it as their own creation. The story of immense suffering and heroic labor was the script written to make the claim believable. It was the mythology required to absorb this impossible object into the accepted historical timeline of the 19th century. This was not a construction project. It was a cover-up. So we are left with a choice. We can continue to accept the official story of the Congo Railway, A story that requires us to believe in a logistical miracle. A story that is unsupported by numbers and contradicted by the physical evidence. A story that relies on vague tales of heroism to paper over vast, unexplainable gaps in logic. Or, we can choose to believe what the evidence suggests. That the railway is a physical fact, but its origin story is a fiction. That what was presented as an act of creation was, in fact, an act of appropriation. The Matadi-Léopoldville Railway is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a challenge to our understanding of the past. It suggests that the history of technology and civilization is not the linear progression we have been taught. It hints at lost chapters, erased knowledge, and a world far older and more complex than we imagine. The true history of our world is not just written in books, many of which are written by the victors. It is written in stone, in earth, and in steel. It is in the infrastructure that surrounds us. We must learn to look at these objects with new eyes, to question their origins, to perform our own logistical analysis, to ask the simple question: does the story make sense? The pattern is global. The anomalies are everywhere, hiding in plain sight. All that is required is to look past the official narrative. The investigation is far from over. This is just one piece of the puzzle. What impossible structures have you seen? What parts of our accepted history feel incomplete? The questions are more important than the answers, because asking them is the first step towards seeing the world as it truly is. If you wish to continue this investigation, to examine more of these anomalies, then join us. Observe everything.